Hello, we will start the session in a few minutes. Good afternoon. Happy World Creativity and Innovation Day. I understand that there are 57 countries that are celebrating this day. I'm Dorothy Davis, president of Dorothy M. Davis Consulting, based in St. Petersburg, Florida, and New York City. Since we are jointly experiencing the COVID-19 pandemic, I thought I would share my experience with the Ebola crisis in Liberia. Before I begin, it's important that I properly introduce myself to you in order to provide context for my thoughts and experiences. So here's a short introductory video about my life and career that was produced in 2015. Okay, Nikki.
Dorothy Davis is an international and national trailblazer. She was born into the free country of Liberia of U.S. Foreign Service parents and raised in Tunisia, Nigeria, Switzerland, and the United States against the simultaneous historical backdrop of the unfolding of the independence movement in Africa, the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, and the student and women's movements. Her father, internationally known photojournalist, diplomat, and filmmaker Griff Davis, saw the world through a camera's lens. He joined the U.S. Foreign Service at the time that the U.S. government created its first embassy in Liberia and in Africa. In so doing, he became a pioneer of President Harry Truman's Point 4 program for foreign aid and the forerunner of the present-day United States Agency for International Development. Dorothy continues to connect her father's legacy with the present by managing his historical photographs. Building on the family tradition, Dorothy was the first director of the Office of Public Affairs and staff liaison to the Board of Trustees of the African American Institute, or AAI as it's known in New York City. During the ending of the anti-apartheid era, Dorothy coordinated high-level, politically and culturally sensitive special events and policy conferences in Africa and the U.S. As the founding board member and now chair of the International Board of the Sirleaf Market Women's Fund of Liberia, Dorothy produced its first fundraiser in 2008, introducing the international president of the AKAs to the SMWF Adopt a Market campaign. AKA Sorer and President of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, spoke at the event and sparked a campaign that raised $500,000 from its chapters nationwide to build the Omega Market in Monrovia. The result? Thousands of market women in the capital of Monrovia now have shelter and adequate space to market their produce and wares. But it was Dorothy's work within the massive United Nations system that's best known. Most notably, she created and managed the United Nations Development Program's highly successful Goodwill Ambassador program. This initiative featured global celebrities who traveled to developing countries for first-hand observations, bringing the human development message to the industrialized world. Dorothy's program was considered a model for all UN agencies. Existing and emerging change agents of the world call on Dorothy for her unique diasporan touch to help them realize their dreams as well as her own, to build new and creative pathways resulting in collaboration and transformation of societies.
By the time this video was produced, I had already gone through one of the most challenging experiences in my life, the Ebola crisis in Liberia. In the video, you see me in Liberia in early March 2014. At that time, there were sporadic whispers of Ebola starting to creep into Liberia. Nothing startling. By the time I returned to New York City in mid-March and became chair of the international board of the then Sirleaf Market Women's Fund, the whispers in Liberia became strong statements. As the days and months passed, they yielded into increasingly louder cries for help. Simultaneously, plans were being made by the US State Department and Department of Commerce for President Barack Obama's historic US-Africa Leaders Summit. It was scheduled to be held in Washington, D.C. in early August. Our organization was planning a high-profile panel as a side event for the summit. We were going to feature President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Liberia and Africa's first democratically elected female head of state, and 2 Liberian market women whom we had arranged to be flown in from Liberia by USAID Monrovia. The Museum of African Art had been secured as the venue. Yet with deaths mounting fast in Liberia due to the Ebola outbreak, we had to abruptly cancel it the week before the summit. Let me give you some background about the Sirleaf Market Women's Fund, or SMWF. The Sirleaf Market Women's Fund was founded in 2005 by a group of Liberian and international women in leadership to honor the election of Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, herself the granddaughter of a market woman. It was an independent, Liberia-based nonprofit organization that operated in the rural and urban communities of 10 counties across Liberia. I was one of the founders. In 2017, it became the Sustainable Market Women's Fund under different management. Market women across Africa have long been a revered symbol of nourishing the nation by providing food security for the masses in strategically located markets that also serve as community centers, hubs throughout the country. In Liberia, market women and street vendors comprise 85% of the country's traders, representing the largest group operating in the informal sector economy. During Liberia's 14-year civil war, market women risked their lives to feed the country by crossing enemy lines, ultimately bringing peace and security to the country. The strength and tenacity of Liberia's market women stands today as a model of resilience and determination. However, because of the war, a high percentage of them are illiterate and heads of households of 8 to 10 people each. When Ebola started to spread like wildfire from Guinea to Liberia in June and July 2014, Then President Sirleaf first declared a national emergency. Although she canceled her trip to President Obama's summit, she addressed the summit via satellite from the US Embassy in Monrovia. By then, Ebola had started to spread into the neighboring country of Sierra Leone, becoming a regional pandemic. The heads of state of those two countries attended the summit in DC, but were seated separately in a somewhat quarantined fashion from the other African heads of state and attendees. President Sirleaf then set up a national Ebola task force that worked in collaboration with the UN agencies that were already established in Liberia as a result of the war, as well as the International Diplomatic Corps already posted in Liberia, in Monrovia. They decided to quarantine the communities in the 15 counties across Liberia. For the market women, this meant that they could not traverse from rural to urban areas to sell their produce to families and restaurants. They had no other means of income. Restaurants closed for fear of catching the Ebola virus. Our SMWF International Board in New York City had to immediately work with the SMWF Board of Directors and staff in Liberia to find quick solutions to these fundamental and challenging questions. There are 5 questions I have here to help explain the situation. The first question, how could we best get the message of self-protection to these illiterate market women without endangering the lives of SMWF staff? Second question, what were the tools we needed to get to them in spite of the quarantine mandated by the national government and transportation and infrastructure challenges? Third, given that the organization operated on restricted funds, where could we raise money to buy the tools for the market women? And fourth, how could we empower the market women to become the spokespersons of the national fight against Ebola in their own communities? Our organization joined the national to local governments and the rest of the country in intensely fighting Ebola in whatever way possible at all levels. Through our resiliency, resourcefulness, and understanding of the culture and its traditions, we developed a flexible, holistic strategy. It included securing fast seed money of $10,000 from our founding donor, the African Women's Development Fund, headquartered in neighboring Ghana. Stressing the urgent need to practice frequent hand washing and refraining from touching by creating culturally and tradition-sensitive radio ads and one television ad that aired nationwide. It was easier for the market women to receive messaging through radio because most of them had access to radios. Very few had access to a television. So that's why our campaign was a radio campaign primarily. Buying and distributing small quantities of buckets and chlorine to each of the 26 markets in 10 counties on an as available basis. Supplying signs with visual instructions of how to stay safe for the market women to put up at their markets in those counties. And in collaboration with the Liberia Marketing Association through funding from UN Women, empowering the market women to become behavior change agents in their families, markets, and communities by adding health literacy training to our mission. By the end of the Ebola outbreak in 2016, 4,850 people had died nationwide out of 11,000 people infected. Within the purview of SMWF, 400 market women had died, immediately altering the lives of 3,200 people in their combined households. 2 American missionaries contracted Ebola at a missionary hospital run by US-based organization Samaritan Purse. They were evacuated by air ambulance to the CDC in Atlanta. President Sirleaf then enlisted the support of President Barack Obama in August 2014. He sent a team from the Center for Disease Control to Liberia to do an assessment of the situation in collaboration with the World Health Organization and the Liberian government. WHO is the lead technical partner in health for Liberia. The CDC then recommended the implementation of the incident management system model to control the response. The model consisted of 12 to 13 thematic teams. Each team was led by a Liberian, but they reported to the overall incident manager who coordinated the entire national response. The World Health Organization and the Liberian government enlisted the involvement of other relevant UN agencies and international organizations to stop Ebola from spreading within and beyond the West African region. Ultimately, there were 2 Ebola-related deaths and approximately 10 people exposed to Ebola on US soil. This story is much more multifaceted than what I have presented here, yet it outlines and generally parallels what we are going through in the US regarding the COVID-19. The difference is that the US has never had the experience of being nationally vulnerable and dependent on other countries. This new position is reshaping our sense of self as a country and our role as global citizens. I'm now opening it up for question and answers. Anybody have questions? No, I don't see anything. Okay. So I wanted to, I think we have one here. Nope, we don't. Okay. I wanted to bring that up because the situation with Ebola required a lot of creative thinking and innovation in each moment. Things kept changing daily and minute by minute. And it's those kinds of situations that require you to dig deep into your experience, into your values, and into your skill level. For me, as chair, there were 2 parts of this. One was managing what was happening in Liberia and supporting and coordinating what was needed there. But the other part was managing the understanding here in the US, in New York, at the United Nations, helping people understand the plight of the market women and how their contributions of whatever sort impacted the market women and how it impacted the country. I remember being in a meeting with UN Foundation. I was the only one representing a civil society organization. The rest were donors, US donors, and they were giving lots of money to support the effort to restrain what was happening to restrain Ebola and the consequences of it. I remember one company, which was an accounting firm, which I will not name, and they were saying that they had sent somebody from their staff to Liberia to basically manage some of the money that was coming in from different parts of the world. And that was great. I felt like that was a great idea, but I felt like it didn't go far enough, which was that once the Ebola crisis ended, had they trained anybody in Liberia to do that same job so that that could continue, and it would not, and they would learn so that it would become part of the uh, skill base in Liberia. That's just one example, but it's the need in a situation, a crisis situation like we are now, to think beyond just the immediate situation, but to think at double levels, the immediate situation and the long term. I am getting questions here. Okay, so, okay, the first question is, could you talk a little more about your experience following your father's legacy and how you are continuing his legacy? Okay. Um, that's a fun one. Uh, I didn't quite have a choice in terms of, I don't think, in terms of not going into international development. So given that I was born to uh, parents who were pioneer foreign service, my dad was a pioneer foreign service officer. That's what I grew up in. That's what I arrived in. That's the environment I arrived in, so to speak. And that's the only environment I knew growing up. And it took me a while. When I got to college, I went to Boston University and Columbia, and I thought I wanted to be a journalist. I didn't quite realize that my father had been a journalist, so I was actually following his footsteps, which I didn't really quite get at that point. But I was told that by the professor there that I could not be an international journalist, and that's the only thing I wanted to do. So I just went a whole different route, and I've been kind of going my own way, creating my own path ever since. It wasn't until 1985, during the Ethiopian drought, when I was invited to join a delegation of women headed by Mrs. Jackie Jackson, which would be Jesse Jackson's wife, headed by her to go to Ethiopia to, at the invitation of then Prime Minister Mengistu, who was communist at the time, to go and make sure that the money that everybody was raising around the world, and particularly in the US, was actually going for that purpose, because at the time Ethiopia was fighting with Eritrea, and so there was some thought that maybe the money was being siphoning off to that. But anyway, once I went on that trip, that revived my whole, I guess it revived my interest in the development world, and from then on, that's where I went. I just found my own path. I could not work for the U.S. government, the Foreign Service. I could not work for them, but I found my own path through international organizations and the UN, essentially, and my own. How am I continuing his legacy? I kind of adapted it my own way. Let's see, how am I continuing his legacy? I guess because I'm using my communication skills in various ways to speak or be a spokesperson for people who don't have a voice at platforms that control their destinies. So I guess that's how I've done that. I hope I answered your question. The next one, what was the biggest challenge in communicating with the locals? Let's see, you skipped there. What was the biggest challenge in communicating with the locals? How did they regard foreigners? Well, I didn't really have a challenge with communicating with Liberians, because basically they were my first environment. I was born in Liberia, and I didn't leave till I was 4, the initial leaving. I didn't leave until I was 4. And so the country and the people shaped me. And then I didn't physically come back to Liberia until I was 14. But in the interim, my aunt, who was my dad's sister, had married two Liberians along the way. And so she was living in Liberia. So we would go back and forth and visit her. So my relationship with Liberia continued from 14 on. So it was home to me. It was really my first home. So I was treated well, and I mean, it was my first home. So it was like being home. In fact, I felt more at home there than I did here. In terms of how they regard foreigners, they're fine with people of everywhere. Liberia was an independent country. It was never colonized. It depends on how you look at that. But in any case, what I'm saying is that there's a conversation going on in Liberia about that right now. But the point is that Liberia had the diplomatic corps from everywhere there, from I guess early in the 1800s and so forth, going forward. So people from everywhere are there. In fact, my first my first childhood friends were the children of diplomats from around the world, and Liberians, obviously. So they're fine with foreigners. Okay, how do you believe we can learn from the Ebola pandemic in order to better our current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, it would be great if we just used the CDC model of the coordinating, incident management model. If we could just do that and just leave it to the experts to manage and tell us exactly what needs to happen. And if we had just started earlier, we wouldn't be in the situation that we are in now. That's what's so frustrating for me right now, watching what's going on with the pandemic here. It's that this could have all been avoided, and the point is that President Obama and his team did put in a handbook, a playbook, if you want to call it, for us to avoid this situation, and it wasn't. We all know the story. So that is the main thing we are doing here. We are doing messaging. I've seen messaging on TV, all the things you should do. I'm not so sure we're getting into different communities, like with us in Liberia, getting into the market women's communities, the grassroots communities. I'm not sure that we're really getting the message there. I think we're relying too much on TV and not really taking advantage of the leaders of those communities, the churches. One of the ways that the market women were able to be successful behavior changers was because they knew basically who ran that neighborhood. And so they went to that person, and that person was respected. They were not from outside the neighborhood. And I think we forget that same pattern here in the US. So I feel like we are not together, and that's the main issue. We are splintered, and while I give a lot of credit to the governors who are taking this seriously, I don't understand why the federal government is not supporting the whole effort and in the way that it's supposed to be. That's how I am. But so I feel like we're going to be in this for a while because we're not paying attention. How do you believe we can learn from a little bit? Okay, I think I got that one. How did Liberia recover for them from their Ebola pandemic, or did they ever really recover? Well, Liberia, one thing that the Ebola outbreak brought forward was the fact that there was a weak healthcare system. And that was evident. And the ratio of doctors to the population is very small. I don't have the exact number, but I mean, it's it's much less than what we have, and the equipment is not there. They wouldn't have, for instance, if COVID-19 came and they needed uh, ventilators, they wouldn't have that. They wouldn't have the equipment that we have. Um, and they don't have the expertise. A lot of things happened when the war left. Before the war, they had expertise, but the war basically drove that expertise out of the country. And one of the things that former President Sirleaf was trying to do was to bring Liberians who left and went abroad, bring them back to the country. But there's a lot of different issues that would require a holistic approach, and I'm sure they're trying to work on it. But they did recover from it in terms of the illness, but there's still infrastructure issues and money issues. What similarities are you seeing in how the COVID-19 pandemic is playing out with the Ebola crisis? Do you have any particular thoughts on how creativity and innovation might be used to shape the future? Well, I guess to answer the first question, the similarities are that you need the equipment, the PPEs, you need that. So that's the similarities. The similarities are that the messaging is about the same or good. The dissimilarities are that it became a global effort. The WHO was the leading partner for Liberia and is the leading partner in many countries across the world, except for here. And their capability of bringing together different resources and collaborating on different methods is very important in terms of not duplicating and not extending a bad situation. Do I have any particular thoughts on how creativity and innovation might be used to shape the future? Okay, so I feel like we're having a global timeout at this point. All these various countries are struggling with COVID-19, and it's still going to increase because it hasn't fully hit Africa yet and other parts of the world. And I think that it's going to require us as a country to think of ourselves as being part of the globe. That we are, we can't do it alone, and that we have to. COVID-19 is showing us where our weaknesses are in our system, in our healthcare system, in the fact that there's disparity in healthcare for African Americans and people of color and different groups. And I think that it's going to, I think the fact that we are working from home, that's another area where we see weaknesses because not everybody has access to the internet or has access to computers or has a job that allows them to do that. So I think the future for the US, if we really take this time to reflect is and think through it and is going to be very different. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be bad. It just means it's going to be different. And we have an opportunity to put together a world that is more human-centered than what we are experiencing now. Okay. what did you learn from being involved in the Ebola crisis that we should apply today to fighting the coronavirus? I think the most important thing I learned is how holistic it was. Okay, so yes, you had the health issue. That was the primary issue, so to speak. But because the women, for instance, were illiterate, that was an education issue. Because some of the roads may not have, at that time, because they're still coming out of the war, some of the roads may not have been the best roads going into the countryside. I'm not saying all of it was, but some of them weren't. So there's an issue of infrastructure. Then there's an issue of just I call it alphabet soup. Pick a letter, pick an area. It's all intertwined, and the other thing that I learned, yeah, I just remembered that. The other thing that I learned was that the aid, and I'm a USAID baby. My dad worked for U.S. Agency for International Development, but the aid that has been given to countries, not just Liberia, is very segmented. So, and it's not coordinated. And so part of the issue of the lack of cohesiveness in terms of infrastructure and so forth is because the projects that were funded were not intertwined with what else needed to be done. For instance, if the okay, so if you're going to build a hospital, let's say, and that's your project, you're going to build a hospital. Well, the hospital needs nurses and doctors. So is that part of the project, or can you partner with some other organization or private company or whatever to come up with the money to do that? Or do you have housing for these people? It's a holistic approach, and I feel like I came away from the Ebola crisis feeling like the development strategies that have been in place are not holistic, and so therefore they're not helping knit a community. They're just kind of segmenting communities. Okay, how do you feel the U.S. is handling the WHO funding issues? I think it's appalling. I actually had a contract with WHO when I first started my business, and it was with the liaison office in New York. The woman who headed the Africa side of that in New York was an Ethiopian, and she was brilliant. And so that was my introduction to WHO from a personal level or a professional level. But I've also watched WHO in action when I worked at UNDP, United Nations Development Program, in the late 1900s, 2000, around there. HIV/AIDS was a raging epidemic worldwide, and the UN was able to pull together the world. Secretary General Kofi Annan pulled together a special session, a special session on HIV/AIDS. The General Assembly had a special session on HIV/AIDS, and the messaging. At the time I was responsible and managing and the Goodwill Ambassador Program for UNDP, and my responsibility was to have these celebrities, who included Danny Glover and Nadine Gordimer and some soccer players, Zinedine Zidane and Ronaldo and so forth and so on, to get them to use their celebrity to get messages out to people about HIV/AIDS, to break the silence, to break the stigma, because there's a lot of stigma at that point. And WHO was right there, involved and helping to create policy and standards around this. So I feel like we're really, well, first of all, I think that the EU hasn't paid its full due anyway to WHO or to other parts of the UN system. So that's number one. The idea of pulling out $400 million at a time in the middle of a pandemic when the whole world is relying on WHO, that's the lead partner, is infuriating for me, because it misses the point, and it misses the fact that if we can't control with COVID-19 in Africa per se, when it starts exploding, that can come to us. I don't really think closing borders is really doing that much. People can come the way they find their way to come. But I do feel like it's our responsibility as global citizens, as members of the UN, as co-founders of the UN, to do our part. And we have a lot to say at the UN. We have a lot to say at the UN, and we're missing a big opportunity to work with others and to problem solve. And I think in the future, we're going to really need each other even more than what we've needed up to now. Okay. How do you think WHO handles Ebola different than COVID? I don't think WHO handles Ebola any different from COVID. I think the US is handling WHO different, is handling COVID differently than it handled Ebola. So I think that's a US question. It's not a WHO question. WHO provides reliable information based on science, and it has its own weaknesses, but it is also an agency that relies on member states, which would mean China and Russia and so forth, and the US, of course, and Canada. And that's a political situation, and so WHO can only do what the member states allow it to do. So to put blame on WHO for things is really kind of not realistic. And the man who heads WHO at this point is believed to be stellar. He has a stellar reputation around the world. So the way the US is approaching WHO at present is really more reflection on the US than it is on WHO. What examples of creativity and innovation have you seen in the past being used to overcome challenges with these pandemics? In the past being used to overcome. Well, okay, so in terms of HIV/AIDS, the use of celebrities in that was new at the time. And that got a lot of people's attention, in the same way that I was saying that communities, that I feel like in terms of COVID-19 outreach, I don't think there's segmented outreach to communities. And when I say communities, I mean neighborhoods, I mean churches, I mean the whole grassroots level. But at the same time, with HIV/AIDS and the fight against HIV/AIDS, we used the celebrities for the first time. We piggybacked off of UNICEF, because UNICEF is the one who started the Goodwill Ambassador program with Audrey Hepburn. But in terms of applying to other agencies, it was under the leadership of Secretary General Kofi Annan that initiative took flight. Took flight. I think through that we were able to create partnerships. There was, for the first time in that, the business community, the private sector got involved with the UN and created the Global Compact. That was the first time that the private sector got involved. It enabled different sectors to work together and to find their common ground, which is the strength of the UN. Do you think that, I think I got that one, okay. Do you think that aid would be more successful if money were just given directly to the citizens of third world countries so they could buy what they need rather than trying to guess what is needed? No, I think you have to have a system to give. But you have to do your research on who you're giving it to, like the organizations. I mean, they're always, in any crisis, there's always somebody trying to take advantage of the money or the situation or something. But there are tried and true international organizations or national organizations who are responsible and who are committed to achieving the goals that they say they want to achieve, or the goals of the initiatives that are being created. There has to be accountability. So you have to find an organization, you have to research them, and you have to find an organization that is really going to get the money to where it should go and is going to monitor that the money is used the way it's supposed to be used. Yeah. And in terms of guessing what people need, it's, those organizations can tell you, and if you're in touch with, I don't know, if you're interested in housing, so to speak, in a given country, one thing is you can find out about organizations by going to the UN and that particular agency. For housing, it's, oh, I forgot, just right then, Habitat, UN Habitat. They have reliable information just in general, and then they break it down by country. And then when you get to the country level, then they can break it down even further. Or you can use the US Embassy in that country. Yeah, I'm just saying that my response to that was that the State Department has changed a lot under this administration, and I'm saying that because I am a Foreign Service brat and I am very aware of how the Foreign Service operates. And so where you could rely on certain things for the State Department before, you cannot now. And also there is a lot of well, there are a lot of empty positions, and there's no real strategy. Diplomacy is not really respected. That's my opinion. Okay. I have heard that Liberians believe in a supernatural world of ancestral and bush spirits that impact their daily life. Was this the case, and were you able to educate by embracing their beliefs or teaching them something new? Well, Liberians, you know, first of all, they're different groups of, different ethnic groups within Liberia. And each one may have their own way of worshiping that may or may not coincide with Western way of worship. But it doesn't mean that it's any less important to them or less effective in terms of helping them do things in their own lives. I don't find myself to be, well, let me start with this. I grew up, like I said, I was born in Liberia. In terms of religion, I was born in Liberia. I was baptized at an Episcopal church. And my mother was Episcopalian and my dad was Baptist, both African Americans. When we moved to Tunisia, which was a Muslim country, I attended a Catholic school, and we went to Episcopal church, but my babysitter was Muslim. Later on in life, I went to Sidwell Friends School, which is a Quaker school. And so my approach to religion is that everyone has the right to believe in what they want to believe. And I do not, I do not tell them how to believe. That's between them and God. Okay, is there any other questions? Okay. Well, I'll wait for, oh, somebody came up. Okay. All right. So I thank you for being with me during this session. Um, I am very happy that today is World Creativity and Innovation Day and is the end of the week. I am also, one of the reasons I am also happy about that is that the creative economy is very important and should be a part of how we reconstruct our country going forward post-COVID-19. Um, we have a lot of artists of all persuasions, meaning, you know, painters and architects and the whole spectrum, and they all um, they they all have something to contribute to allow us to think out of the box. And I think this is a great opportunity. One of the silver linings of this devastating situation is for us to begin thinking out of the box, not only for ourselves, but for our families, our communities, and our country and our world. Um, so I wish you a happy World Creativity and Innovation Day. And I thank Maureen Art Center and My Favorite Art Place of St. Petersburg, Florida, for inviting me to speak. And if you want to reach me offline, so to speak, I can be reached at dd@dorothymdavis.com, or you can go to my website of basically the same name, www.dorothymdavis.com. Thank you.